Let me introduce today's ScaleUp champion, Paul Lee, who is the founder and managing partner of Vantage Capital, a leading Vancouver-based venture fund focused on hard science and technologies that bring change to the world. Vantage was actually one of 8 global venture funds chosen by NVIDIA to launch its Inception Venture Capital Alliance program, one of just 2 outside of the United States. He was a principal at Distinctive Software, which became Electronic Arts Canada, and the former president of Electronic Arts, running their worldwide product development. And over the last 35, you're looking awfully young for 35 years, Paul. He has been a successful investor, including as an institutional fund manager, an angel investor, and now an institutional venture capitalist. So please join me in welcoming Paul. Paul, it's fantastic to see you. I'm looking forward to catching up.
Hi there.
Well, let's get started. I gave a bit of an overview of your career, your background, but let's hear about you in your own words. Can you tell us a bit about your career and your role today?
Okay. I think it's there, but, I started at UBC, born and raised in Vancouver, went to UBC, became a fund manager, decided I couldn't live outside of Vancouver and moved back, did video games. We had a small company, Don Matrick and I. We did, development for other game publishers. EA came knocking. We ended up merging it with Electronic Arts. They were 240 people. We were 75. They wanted in-house development. So we became part of EA. And, the company grew exceptionally quickly. There were some great people at EA. I'll just say that. And, I learned a lot, stayed there for another 17 years. When I left, we had about 9,000 people. Our largest studio worldwide was in Vancouver. We had 14 studios worldwide. I ran all worldwide product development, so I had about 6,000 and 9,000 staff. Probably bought about, 17 to 19 companies along the way to continue the growth. And then I left to start a venture fund, Vantage Capital, the goal of which was to put Vancouver on the map and to make sure we became a tech center. We figured it's a 20-year goal. I had 2 big bets on it. To be a tech center, we needed to have a company that could be like Microsoft or Google, a platform company. My bet on that was D-Wave. It's been 20-something years. I didn't think it'd take that long. And still, jury's still out. And then the second one is to have a top tier venture fund that's recognized globally, especially out of Silicon Valley. And we figured for the first 10, 15 years, our entire focus needed to be on the numbers. And as we do well, then we would have more and more control of what it is that we want to invest in and how to do that. And we would start to turn more inward once the ecosystem grew here and we had more flexibility. So that was.
It's a really great story. So as you say, success brings options, right? So
Yeah.
first build the success and then you've got the freedom. But that's an amazing story to hear. And you've been a champion of BC and BC's tech sector for years. You used to be a chair of BC Tech, I think, many years ago. And I think the work that you've done personally to try and push BC forward and encourage us to own the podium has been amazing. So thank you for that and for your continued encouragement. Now, fast forwarding to today and just sort of thinking about where we are now and what the last few years have been like, it's been kind of a wild ride. So what's it been like being a venture investor with the uncertainty of COVID and then tech boom? What's it been like for you at Vantage the last few years?
Oddly enough, I think, for me, we've had a great last 6 months. Much better than, and that's luck, but much better than I would expect it. But I think what has really driven it is, number one, when things are going well, companies don't feel the need to change what they're doing. And when things aren't going well, then it feels a greater need to do something different. I remember, and I've been involved in a number of companies in BC along the ways as an angel investor. So Oddly enough, ALI Technologies, which after the dot-com crunch is when companies felt we had to do something different. That was acquired by McKesson at the time, put them number one. Blast Radius, where we thought it was going to be dead, boomed during the financial crisis, because when your marketing budget gets dropped 20%, you suddenly think you have to do something different. And actually, over the last 6 months, we've had a phenomenal time with, Canlis being acquired and Raxon being acquired. So it's been great. And I think a lot of that comes to the fact that we've been, again, fortunate first and foremost, but secondly, we focus on, really core technologies that we think will be impactful, driven by really exceptional people. And if we get that right, then in these periods, it's when big companies need to do something different and they start looking to acquire or even to finance and be part of it. So it's been great for us. But what is great, what has been really good, what's been really good also for BC and seeing it is the fact that we're, when we were doing this 10, 20 years ago, there wasn't that much senior management. And you kept on hearing how, you had to go outside, you had to grow this, you had to bring this. And we did bring a lot of senior management. But today, the ecosystem has changed so dramatically that no longer do we have trouble finding senior management for companies. And no longer do we have trouble finding people who no longer think we just need to build for the Canadian market. They're thinking global leadership now. So, that it's kind of, they used to say, BC is where Silicon Valley was 25 years ago. I don't feel that anymore. And you're seeing more and more of Silicon Valley rush up here, and Seattle rush up here.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to watch the market mature and the realization of the quality of the talent and the companies that we have here. It's funny because sometimes people think of it as a negative if companies are acquired. And I'm like, sometimes that can be the best possible way for that technology to reach the world. What bothers me is when people don't sell at the right moment, when they sell too early. So add a zero, keep going until you've scaled it. And sometimes the right answer is for a B2B SaaS company to be acquired by a strategic buyer. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how you'd be amazed. Well, you would know, but I don't know how much of the audience would know how many amazing things in technology at some of the majors today were actually invented, created, innovated in BC. And today they're impacting the world. So it's just been fascinating. But I love also you talking about, the enemy is the status quo, right? When everything's going fine, nobody wants to change. But if you're an innovator, you need change. You need that opportunity. So it is interesting to think about what recessions or challenging markets can mean for tech. But there is one thing that people are asking me about a lot, which is, hey, the market's a bit more challenging and I'm worried that I'm going to find it harder to raise capital so that I can realize the potential of my company. What do you see? Are you still making investments? Do you think there's enough capital out there for high quality companies? What's your perspective on that?
It's definitely harder for companies to raise money. That goes without saying. On the flip side, there's lots of capital out there, lots and lots of capital out there. And actually, fundraising for venture funds and private equity might actually be higher in 2022 than it was in 2021. So when you add that all up, it's not that there's no money. It's that the interest rates have gone up and the stock market has gone down, and there's a lag effect. And so what you're seeing is that the multiples and the valuations have gone in half. And a lot of the companies haven't adjusted to that reality. When you look at the multiples over, let's say, even a 10-year average, companies that trade, and I saw this the other day from HarborVest, but companies that grow at greater than 30% and are achieving market dominance, the average multiple was 7 times revenue, 7, 8 times revenue. They got as high as 20 times revenue. They're down to like half of that. but they're still higher than the 10-year average. So when you factor that in, the hardest part of raising capital is adjusting to the fact that the valuation there, and I know a lot of investors who've just decided to sit on the sidelines because they don't want to be the ones who are telling the companies that they like everything but the valuation. They figure someone else will do it and they'll just wait for the lag effect, which is hard for companies, but it's not a function of there not being dollars out there. It's a function of adjusting to the valuation. And my personal view for a lot of the companies is don't worry so much about it. You know, if you do great and you achieve the leadership and you're making your plans, you will have a lot of flexibility and you can always load up the stock option plan. You know, investors don't tend to want to change management if things going well.
It's a great point. So the advice to founders, don't worry, be patient, be realistic about your valuations, but
yeah, there's too much focus sometimes on the percentage of the pie. The only thing that really matters is how fast you're growing that pie. The rest of it will take care of itself. And actually, most good investors I know will make sure that there's enough incentives in place if the company is doing well. If the company is not making, you know, achieving its goals or not doing that well, yeah, they use that as a mechanism just in case they need to make changes. And they know that, you know, if a company's doing well, they will just load it up.
yeah, I think that's critically important, right? So if the company's doing well, if it's got the potential to grow, if everything's great, the investors are incented to make sure the management founders are totally incented to achieve the most that can possibly be achieved.
And actually, some of my best investments, I will say, were done at valuations that were higher than I wanted, and stock option plans that were higher than I wanted. But at the same time, you know, there's a saying in venture, you have all these criteria, you know, growth, management's critical, the size of the market, all this stuff. And when you go through all of them and you have to give on one, as an investor, you know, the one you really want to give on is valuation. If everything else checks the box, that's the one you want to give on. And if it's something else, if it's management, you really don't want to do that deal anyways. Doesn't matter what the valuation is.
Let's stay on that for a little while because you and I had a really interesting chat when we were preparing for this about you know, when you reflect over the years on your experience, is it particular verticals that were amazing for you? Was it being first on an emerging technology or a trend? Was it the team? Was it the founder? Like when you look back, when you think about the patterns of what has been a really successful investment for you, what do you see?
So I know now, by the way, it's different for everyone, and I'm not saying my experience or my personal way of investing is the right one. But for me, I'm looking for, as processing power keeps on improving, I'm trying to understand what is being enabled, what is able to be done now that couldn't have been done before because we just didn't have the processing power. And an example of that is just how much better we're getting in AI. Just what is happening with all that in terms of, you know, drugs or materials. You know, we're no longer trying to mix chemicals to find a drug. We're just creating molecules. And that's because from drug research to material sciences, all massive computing that's trying to create new molecules, they're trying to be used specifically. And so what I'm looking for is just exceptional founders who are moving into a new space, not something we've done before. This is just something that's relatively new, that is now being enabled. And we go after that. And we're looking for them to be able to achieve, you know, number one in a particular niche. Doesn't have to be able to think just in a niche. I get people come in all the time telling me what kind of business they're doing. And those are all the things that you do to be in that space. but what is it that you are actually, what niche are you targeting that you're going to win and be number one at? Because if you don't, you probably won't make the profits that you need. I mean, technology is one where it gravitates to monopolies. So the only companies that make money are the ones who are number one. So tell me, number one, what's the niche you're going to target and win? Number two, how are you going to build a moat around that? And number three, how big that market is. If you can do that, then you've got a defense position to grow from that. That's what I'm looking for. Founders who are going after that and then growing it from there. And, you know, the teams that understand and drive that, you know, they tend to have a pretty good track record. At the very least, it's worth the bet. And, you know, most of the great companies have started from there, own something, and generate enough profits to expand quickly in other areas and start, you know, elbowing their way through the adjacencies.
It's so interesting to think about that interplay of, yes, of course, it's about the tech, but it's also about the team, and it's about the ambition and the speed and the impatience because you're not going to be number one in a niche if you're moving at a regular pace. You want to be moving at an exceptional pace, which is why these talent gaps are such a big deal. If we don't have enough talent to fuel the machine, then it's hard to be number one. So that's one of the reasons why we focus on that so much. There's no such thing as a slow moving tech company.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the challenge is when, you know, what you've had to do to get success up to a certain point, not necessarily the same thing you have to do to achieve success beyond that. And what we need to do is make sure that the team can keep up, but not everyone wants to keep up. Not everyone wants to move from a small scale to big scale. And it's critical to ensure that you backfill that or you fill that in, because as the companies grow, and by the way, I'm a big fan of companies who are acquired. You know, people make some money, make a lot of money. They're willing to go for a much bigger bet when they've, you know, made some money, and they're willing to start their own thing. So when that happens and they're in a position to sell, this question is, number one, if you're doing well, do you want to? And number two, it's not like people force you. You've got choice if you're doing well. And number two, what are you going to get paid depends entirely on, there's a certain value for a company on metrics. That's okay. There's this additional value for the company based on what are called synergies with that company, which is how strong the management team is and the people that are there, and whether they can take not from how they're doing, but the company is acquiring them or merging with them. There's, you know, what's their business and how strong is the team, and can they end up running other parts of the business? Companies will pay dramatically more, almost double, maybe even triple, with the right team in place. So when people talk valuations, they don't understand how important, especially for BC companies, where a lot of the companies in Silicon Valley are looking for expanded development because they can't hire enough, and the quality of the people that they're hiring at double, triple the rates are no longer as strong as, you know, what you're getting elsewhere, like in BC. So, you know, when I buy a company in BC, I want to make sure that they can double, triple in size, and that management can drive that. And then the third piece of it is, oh, if I'm working with them and their competitors and they acquire us, they can, you know, it kind of hurts their competitors, but that's worth a certain value. So there's this whole process you have to go through to make sure that if you want a great exit, you want to start building to make sure those three components are knocked off along the way. And, you know, that's a hard conversation for some teams, but for, you know, good managers that take more global perspective, it's sort of like, yeah, this is how we have to build if we want to be successful.
Yeah, there is a formula, as you say. It's a complicated formula, but there is a formula for success. But I loved what you were saying at the beginning of that too, which is you really need to think about, well, how you want to spend your life. What's the exciting part of the journey for you? There's plenty of really successful people who start multiple startups, grow it to a medium-sized stage, and have no ambition to run a major multinational corporation, and that's fine. They love the early stage of the journey and they're really successful at it and they're skilled at bringing in a different management team or making an exit at the right stage. And then there's others that are just miraculously able to come up with a new idea, develop it into a promising startup, grow it into a scale stage, turn it into an anchor, turn it into a multinational success story, and run a major corporation. But those are the real unicorns. It's unusual to be amazing at every stage of the growth. You just got to pick your stage, right? What's worth it for you? It's a wonderful view of the world that sees every stage of the journey as successful. It's just a question of what part do you want to play. Listen, one thing I like to ask my guests about, because it often gives us one of the richest answers, is can you tell us about a time in your life when you failed? You've got so much success, and we've enjoyed unpacking that. But what did you learn from failure?
I will say that most lessons come from failure, not from success. And success has many fathers. Everyone takes credit for their piece, and they all overvalue what they've done. And the reality is, I'm a venture investor. Yeah, I sit on boards. In any point in time, the CEO and management team makes 100 decisions a day. Maybe one of them every month comes up to the board for consideration and strategic. So it's not success. I mean, yeah, when a company's doing well, it's easy. It's great being a venture capitalist. You go on the board meeting once a quarter, you drink the coffee, you eat the donuts, you wax poetically, you pat yourself in the back, how great job you're doing, you leave. You don't really do anything. When the company's not doing well, it's a lot of hard work. You second guess, you're looking into the market, you're trying to understand the people. It's a lot of work. But in terms of success, what have I learned? Well, there's a lot of things I've learned from failure. I mean, I'd say it took me 10 years to understand that when a company or team is working on a product and they need more people, that must have been 10 years. Almost every time I went through it and I gave it to them, that was a mistake. What I should have done is taken a person away, because it gets down to not what it is they're doing to make it better or nicer looking or whatever, or more features. At the core, what's the one thing that is so critical about this product that everyone needs to buy it? And taking someone away makes it much more clear how hard it is. That's one. Number two, a first-time manager, a CEO, they want to prove that they could, that they're good at everything. I'm now responsible for all this stuff. I got to prove that I can, I understand all this stuff. And the reality of it is that then they end up, everyone knows I'm lousy at finance. I'm going to prove to them I'm good at finance. So they spend all their time on the area of weakness. An experienced manager sits there and go, okay, everyone knows I'm bad at finance. That's why don't talk to me. Talk to so-and-so I've hired who's great at finance. An experienced manager spends their time on the areas of strength, not the area of weakness. So those are common things. Third piece of it is when I think about all the companies we've done that have been successful versus the ones that haven't been successful. And don't forget, we're a venture fund, so a whole bunch of them are not successful. And we have failures. Rarely have we been wrong on our thesis. Almost every time that we've gone through it, it's been not the thesis, but execution, wrong people, not getting aligned in terms of the vision, not agreement or understanding about, some of the areas or how that space is going to evolve, things of that nature. It's never been the thesis. So getting the right team is critical. Getting alignment and just how you communicate. I mean, when I was going at EA, you go someplace and you make suggestions, you leave, you come back and they take it seriously. When you're a minority investor, you come back and it's like, no, we threw that up like 2 minutes after you left. We never really considered it. And secondly, if you're going to change it at a board meeting, It's never going to happen. You've got a whole team that has totally invested in that presentation they're making at that board meeting. They're not really open to discussions about that strategy in front of the CEO's not particularly open in front of his whole team on something they spent hours preparing for. So if you want to influence that, you got to have discussions well before that board meeting. At the board meeting, that's like the wrong time. So, these are, some of them took me a long time to learn. These are examples. And yeah, I can't even imagine how many mistakes I made along the way, but there was a lot.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. I loved the whole idea of like, if we could just add something else to the product, it will be successful, when instead you should take away, that we should focus on our strengths and not our weaknesses. Just find a compensating mechanism for your weaknesses. There's some real wisdom there. At the end of the day, right, it's a people business as much as it's a product business. So it's interesting to hear how much success is driven by the people and how much failure can be caused by that. Listen, Paul, you've always been a tremendous champion of the tech sector. Um, you're obviously, we were just talking, you got to play to your strengths. So tell me about some of the strengths. Help us understand from your perspective what's objectively, globally impressive about BC. Where are our competitive strengths?
Look, it's the people. I mean, there's, as you mentioned, there's so many things that were started here that came, Microsoft, let's go down the list, email. Oh, now that's kind of important. They bought a company here to get the core of it. Their whole web publishing business, that came from here. Look at Mo Kermani, create the world's first cloud storage system, again, from here. The whole shift in digitization for, disrupting the whole Yellow Pages business. Olivier and Amy were part of that. Olivier Vincent, actually, we've just refunded them again. They, drove a lot. Blast Radius, the whole shift. It's not about just online advertising. It's about community building. McDonald Detweiler. And let's talk, there's just so many things that were done out of here. And what really hampered it for years, and why we decided, why we call it Van Ed, Vancouver, was the fact that we didn't have and couldn't bring the capital there. Even now, if you look at, 87% of venture funds are in Ontario, Quebec, but a whole much higher percentage of the deals are done here. And by the time they see it, it's much later on. So I think we have great people who are doing really innovative. I haven't even gotten into the life sciences side, couldn't think of it. And the list goes on. We just need to find some way of, taking our rightful place. And actually what's happening in Silicon Valley, what's happening in the US, you got all these global technology. I think almost every major technology company in Silicon Valley now has an office here. They don't broadcast it, but if you're hiring globally, a lot of times you don't want to bring them into the US. They don't want to go either in this current environment. So they come to Vancouver, and it's great. And that's really what's driving our housing prices and whatnot. What we also could use is government that understands that. And, what do we need in tech that, if we're in forestry, we want lower stumpage, we want, better trees, we're mining, we're in tech. We need people, and people want a great place to live. That means economic opportunity, great schools, great healthcare, low crime, opportunities, good transportation. It's everything everyone talks about. And instead we drive wedge issues. And I wish, our shift, by the way, we've made huge progress, 3-4 years ago, the entire, sector of resource sector was down. Vancouver didn't fall. We thrived. Tech is now becoming way more dominant in British Columbia than most of the people understand. And we need them to start adjusting their policies in understanding, yes, we need more housing. Yes, we need lower prices, but we really need to solve all those issues and make this a great place to live rather than driving wedge issues to highlight differences.
It's real words of wisdom there. Now, just going to remind my audience that you're welcome.
Well, I say that because BC Tech is one of the most influential for public policy. So you have done a great job of that. So I just wanted to make sure I threw my 2 cents in.
Hey, I appreciate that. Like we've worked quite hard on that in the last few years, and especially our new economic narrative research series, because the economy in BC is just not what we tell ourselves it is. Right? It is. We are no longer an economy that's dominated by natural resource commodity exports. We're actually dominated by technology, by life sciences, by the various knowledge-based industries. And as you say, the core input that those industries require is talent, people, human beings, and an environment that is optimized for human beings. They have to be able to afford housing and have access to childcare and great health and great education and low crime in their neighborhoods. And if we could encourage focus on the things that are needed to support and to grow today's real economy in BC, it would be fantastic. So we keep working hard on that. So just to remind my audience, please raise your questions in the chat and I'll come to the group in a moment and ask if you have any that you want to raise live. But I think I will ask Paul just one final question, which is, if you had a complete wish list, if you could talk to the Premier of BC or the Prime Minister of Canada in a private moment and ask them to do one thing that would really help to support and promote Canada's and BC's tech sector, is there one thing that you'd really ask them to pay more attention to?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure it's one, but it's quality of life. That means we need housing, but choice. This idea of building throughout Vancouver, the whole, everything's 4, 6 stories doesn't make any sense. Some people want single family houses. Some people want high rise. I mean, I grew up in Burnaby and they're doing a great job. 60, 80 floors, densification in areas. And that's driving a lot of people who are suddenly considering that. Transit has everything you need. I don't need a car. We want that. Other people want single family houses because you got the tax base there. You can afford that. So there's that. Crime. We need to, true freedom is the ability to walk anywhere and do anything. You want opportunities. You're not, if you take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you got to solve some of the fundamentals. That's important. Economic development is really important because that's what's going to lead to affordability. Yes, housing is expensive in BC, but the reality is when you compare the cost of housing on a per square foot basis in Vancouver versus other world-class cities, and we're like over 100 in terms of where we rank, but we're high relative income. Our income levels are way too low here in BC. Okay, so the reality is, we need to drive them up. So we shouldn't be afraid of the fact that the Microsofts, the Amazons are coming in offering much higher salaries. And yes, I hear that makes it hard for our littler companies. But the reality is that the ecosystem build requires us to be across the board a much higher paying economy ecosystem. And schools are critically important. This idea that we're going to get rid of the honors programs, the idea that we're going to get rid of competitive sports. When I grew up in public school system, I needed that. If I had to go find the dollars to join a club or get some particular thing to actually participate in something competitive, I never would have made it. So, this idea of driving down to the lowest common denominator is just a mistake. And we've got mental health issues, drug issues. We've got it. We need a strong economy to allow us to start dealing with those issues. And I'm not even convinced that, we need a strong economy. They need to be dealt with if we're going to have a strong economy. So quality of life across the board, healthcare, schools, opportunities, that's what people want. They want to live in a great city where all that is happening and done well. And that's what, if we want to be if we want to be a future economy as the world moves from past industrial age to this information age, we need to spend more across board, spend more attention on making this a great place to live and keeping it there.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. And it's something I hear often from tech leaders. It's one of the reasons why I absolutely love my job and representing this industry, because I have never had somebody say this industry needs a special tax break. I have never had somebody say this industry needs special treatment and subsidies. What I hear is that this industry wants everyone in BC to have opportunity and to have a great quality of life. And it makes me very proud to represent a sector and a new economy like that. Well, let's go to the chat because we do have some fantastic questions. So one, are Canadian investors less risk averse than the US Silicon Valley investors? I keep getting told to take my project across the line. What would you say, Paul?
I want to say that that's not true. It drives me nuts that a lot of times you need to prove success in the US before anyone in Canada believes that their product is innovative and new. I think that's changing, but it's not 100% there yet, which is sad. But there are a lot of people who, look, the reason we did Van Edge was because back then, the way the Canadian venture capital system worked is, and there's a book on this by Josh Lerner, A Book of Broken Dreams. Government funds venture capital, and who gets funded tends to be the people who are close to government who can help raise the money. And they tend to be investment bankers and lawyers. But they didn't understand the technology. So they went with the trends that they read about, and they really couldn't discern between one tech or what's innovative or what's just in there. So they went with what they heard. And we had a pretty poor track record. I think the average return for a venture fund in Canada, 10, 20 years ago was like 10 points lower than the average in the US. That's changed dramatically. So there's a lot of funds that still appeal to government. We're specialized in this, that, whatever the flavor of the day. But there's a lot more funds now where they have good technologists on the team that can discern what is innovative, what isn't.
So less true today than it used to be, but we did have to play a bit of a catch-up game. Okay.
Yeah.
Another question. As a VC, Paul, what is something that you look for before making an investment that most startups miss or don't think about enough?
Clarity of thought and focus. What exactly is the niche you are going to dominate? How are you going to build that moat? Why do you think you'll get there? And do you have the team to get there? As I said, most presentations are, this is the space we're in. We probably review, I don't know how many thousands. We kind of know the space you're in. We kind of know all the stuff you have to do to be in that space. Very few of the presentations really highlight, which is, I guess, the art in Silicon Valley of that 30-second, pitch. Here's why I'm going to win.
Lovely. So when you're in front of serious money, they are going to know about the size of the TAM. They are going to know about the opportunities. What you want to hear is, how is this particular company, this particular team, this particular play going to win against that context? Don't spend all your time talking about the potential of the market. Yeah,
and the reality of it is, we'll still ask those questions just to see if, we're looking for self-awareness. If you don't know, it doesn't mean we don't know. It's just that we're less interested. When you give me a deck, I go through the deck. But, the stuff that I'm looking at is, anything you put in the deck probably is something that you think is important. I'm looking for what's not in the deck. And what's not in the deck is probably where all the weaknesses are. So, it's like, okay, great.
Interesting. So sometimes you're asking questions to just check that people do understand. Other times you're asking about gaps, but you're more interested in what's not there than what is there. That's
But
good.
I'm most interested in why you're going to win.
Why are you going to win? It's a great question, and I appreciate that clarity. Actually, that was a great answer, Austin. I hope you're happy. So let me just check. Oh, follow-up question from Austin. There you are. We were typing quickly. If you've evaluated your strengths and you've identified where your weaknesses are, what suggestions would you make to someone who'd like to work on their weaknesses in order to make the win? What would you say to Austin?
Well, most times it's really hard to spend your time working on your weaknesses. You're better off just hiring someone else to take care of the weaknesses. Oh, I'm bad at it. I'm never going to be good at it. That's why so-and-so's dealing with it. Just the other part, just because we say no to someone doesn't mean it's always a no. It's just maybe no at that point. And sometimes it's just because we're focused in a couple of key areas. When I think of a couple, I'm not going to say it, but there's some areas that I really wish we had a bigger bet in. And I'm spending time on it because I'm frustrated that I haven't gotten more progress in those areas. So I'm spending less time on, what could have been a great company, just it's not my focus right now. And a lot of times I'll just pass it on to someone else on the team, but we've got a small team. So no one wants to pick it up because they're focused on their areas that they really want. And, it doesn't go. But a lot of times, that's just because we're not focused that area. And once we get more time, we forget to double back. So, I wouldn't be disheartened where, and that's like it for most things. I've had to do a lot of fundraising. I hate fundraising, by the way. Everyone hates fundraising. I hate fundraising. And, sometimes a lot of fundraising, it's a new day every day for some of our investors. And so, no, I'm not interested. Next day, hey, how come you didn't call me? You weren't interested. Oh. So.
You just got to make the calls. Okay, listen, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and I'm paying attention to the time because I always like to make sure that we finish on time for everybody. I'll just ask you if you have any parting words of advice or encouragement to our audience today, Paul.
I would say just figure out what you're doing, make sure it's a big enough market, and make sure you're making progress. And, driving to a leadership position, figuring out what the mode is, even if companies or funds don't invest at that time, as long as there's clarity, a lot of times, a lot of funds will look at it to see the progress you're making. It's one thing to hit a target. What we're really after are companies that are moving fastest towards that. So sometimes we're a no also because we're watching it for 6 months to a year to see how fast the progress you're able to achieve on that. We might not all admit that, but that is the reality for a lot of investors I know. And that's why sometimes the people who are known have an advantage. We know how fast they move.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. This has been a fabulous conversation.